This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Scherrie Prince. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, yeah, I'm doing fine. This is actually the last podcast for 2023 because we'll be starting it up again at the beginning of the new year. But want to welcome you to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. And it's always good to have new folks on the show.
Well, look, I'm glad to be here. I like to feel like maybe you saved the best for last, so it's an honor.
And I also want to let people know that this is going to be episode 1036 of the Family Electric Ghost podcast, tracking out an Apple podcast since 2016. And today we do have your website up. So CherriePrince.com, and then we've got the /AP blueprint. That will be fully clickable for anybody who's interested on all the published versions of the podcast, even the Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch we're on right now. That link will be active once we're actually finished with the show tonight. So you'll be able to click on that everywhere that the podcast is viewed or listened to, so people can contact you that way. So if they click on that, what would the audience get?
So, I do a monthly webinar where I teach people about the basics for asset protection. And it is a free webinar once a month for about an hour. We get you in and out over your lunch break if you have one around that time. And we just talk about things you can do to protect your legacy personally and your business.
That's awesome because what we're going to talk about today is building a strong foundation, legal protections for entrepreneurs. And we started this podcast primarily talking to creators who happen to be like musicians, filmmakers, artists. And we have a tendency not to think about things like that because we put all of our assets into our art. And then we're like, okay, we believe in it and it will come back. But sometimes we probably need to be more conservative than we are, or more into thinking about asset protection, where a lot of times we throw everything at the project. So that, given that kind of mindset, how maybe that's a good kind of starting point. If you have somebody that's a creative person who's used to kind of throwing everything at it, and having very minimal assets left after when they work on projects, what kind of strategy would you think of for a person like that?
First, I tell people not to really concentrate on the number or the amount of assets they have. You know, everything you have needs to be protected. No matter where you are in the world, we all have an expiration date. So, what happens to your stuff at your expiration? And so, we look at it like transitioning, whether we're leaving things to family members, whether we're leaving business interests to a business partner, a creative partner. So, we really try to start with the basics. If you're a creative person, you still should have something like a living will, maybe a power of attorney, a HIPAA authorization form. You may have a will or a trust. So those are just the basic things that everybody needs. Then we kind of step it up a little bit and we talk about things that you need for your business. And that is, oh, look, I know we only have a limited amount of time, but that is a really fun conversation for me. So, yeah, so step one, personally, we get you situated, and then we talk about your business a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's important because a lot of creative people, we might own masters, copyrights, licensing contracts, and if we don't have a will, well, where's that going to go to? Like a lot of us today, we have sync licensing, which is a complicated thing. But the way artists make money now, today, musicians, is tend to make them through sync licensing contracts, which means your music might be licensed to a film, to a Mass and Avenue, advertising company, to a video game company. If you don't have a will, then where's that money going to come to after you're gone if you don't set that up?
So here's the interesting thing. You may not have a plan, but the government has a plan for your assets. So every state in the United States, they have a set of laws for what's called intestate succession, which basically means you die without a will. So, and it says for each state what happens, depending on where you live, all of it may go to your spouse, or half may go to your spouse, half may go to your children. If you don't have a spouse or children, there's already a plan in place in every state in the United States. And different
Wow.
countries do it differently. But what happens if you may be estranged from, you don't have a spouse, you don't have kids, and you may be estranged from your family? and you really don't want them to have all your wealth. Maybe you want to give it to charity. It's worth taking the time to put together a plan. And I love that you talked about intellectual property and different rights to your masters and your music, because most creatives or business owners, they don't even think about IP. They're thinking about real estate and personal
Mhm.
property. But IP is a huge thing to consider.
Yeah, today, I mean, I'm a software designer in my day job. So until, that's hard to kind of pin down, but it's worth, the type of stuff we build are worth millions of dollars. And it's not something like a house. It's not your car. It's not land. It's not real estate. But those software designs, if you were part of the, company and you've got ownership in it, they're worth lots of money. And just because you can't hold your hands on that, it's just like the song or the film or the piece of art that might be like digital art, might be in that new space where there's so many things that are out there on the net in terms of creativity where people have published works that don't have physical form.
Yeah, and one example I love to give people just to kind of make it more real. Look at Michael Jackson's estate or Prince's estate. They are no
Mhm.
longer with us, but their music is, I hate to say eternal, but their estates will be open in perpetuity because there are so many royalties that the estate a lot of times makes more money than the artist when the artist was alive.
Yeah.
So,
It's a big
yeah,
problem. It's like the Hendrix estate, because Hendrix had a big problem. If anybody, I'm a big music head, but he had a massive problem. When he died in the 70s, he had signed so many contracts just to work that his family had to weed through so many problems. Even to this day, there are people fighting rights for performances. There's a famous performance from the Royal Albert Hall from like 68 that's still not seen the light of day because it's still in litigation.
wow.
It's
And
a full
see,
filmed performance, and it still hasn't got out of litigation to figure out who's gonna get what.
you brought up something that's really important because when we think about asset protection, we're trying to be proactive, but a lot of people don't consider the effect of contracts during their lifetime because the contracts during your lifetime become binding on your heirs when you pass away. So you may be thinking, okay, when I'm gone, they'll just bury me or cremate me and that's it. No, you still have, a legacy to consider. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, it's very you gotta be careful because a lot of times I think a lot of artists really do need to have an attorney to help them because when they're signing these contracts, they really need to have some, because a lot of times the work we do is based, in the wrapper is the contract. And if you don't own the master, you don't own the distribution, or it's not a fair deal, and you just did it to get an advance, and you're just thinking short term, and you didn't think about like, oh, they actually own the film rights. They owned the rights if they want to use it for advertising, if they want to turn something into a toy, and then you've lost all this ability to make money because you kind of undersold yourself because you didn't have good representation. It's kind of the artist story. It's
Oh
kind
my
of a
God.
tragic story all the time.
And a more recent story, and I'm gonna, when I talk about this, I'm gonna take a different angle. So just watch out. The recent litigation with P. Diddy and Cassie. Now,
Mm,
looking at the standpoint from the employer, employee, or contract litigation, he had her in a 10 album contract.
mm.
And I think she only put one album out. And so, I mean, you could even argue that it's indentured servitude because, some people may say that he never intended for her to do any of those albums, but for him to have control over
Lock
her
her down.
career. Yeah,
Yeah, you lock somebody down.
yeah.
It's unreasonable to think somebody if they're not super big, how could they ever have 10 albums, right?
But it was a measure of control. And so that's why you have to be very careful about the contracts you enter into and the way that you protect your assets. Her main asset and the way that she feeds her family is through performance. And if
Mhm.
she's not allowed to perform and make money, what assets do you have? So that's just
Yeah.
something to think about.
Yeah, it's a lot of that's true because a lot of times in music today, the rates we get for streaming, people might not realize it's like 0.004 or 0.005 of a penny per stream on any of the major platforms. You have to do billions of streams to make any money. And even the big guys argue about the money that they get. So the main thing that people do is sync licensing, performance, merchandising. So like your T-shirt will give you more money than your album. Your poster will give you more money than your record. Your ticket for your show will give you more money than your record. And that's kind of sad until you license that song to a film or a TV show or an advertisement. Then you start the rates go significantly up. So like artists have figured out that we do have to deal with lawyers. We do have to start thinking about because we might not understand the best deal because that's not our area. So how do we know how to negotiate or have a contract that's actually advantageous to ourselves?
Well, and another thing to think about as well, and this is, this has become more popular with student athletes, but the name, image, and likeness, you know, opportunities that are available for athletes.
Mm,
So now you have teenagers or young adults who are monetizing based on, some skill or ability they have, or because they're an influencer.
mm.
How do you handle those things? You
Yeah,
know,
and then how do you deal with AI? Because somebody suddenly, if you didn't notice there was an AI part of that contract, they could take your image and then copy it and then not pay you one time. Pay you a
exactly.
one-time fee. If you get a one-time fee, it's a ripoff because if they use that in AI, they're gonna spread it out everywhere and they're gonna make a lot of money. And then you only paid you like a work for hire, which is always the big rub for artists. They gotta be careful doing work for hire versus getting royalties.
Oh yeah. So, and there was one, I think a show called Black Mirror that made fun, made fun of the whole, AI, where they had taken, I think, Selma Hayek's image and used it in perpetuity because she had signed a contract and didn't read the fine print. So, I mean, it's a real thing. And I think
Mhm.
over time, we're going to be seeing it happen more and more if people are not very careful.
Well, it's also like there's one thing I try to tell people, like, sometimes the tech gets ahead of the law. So back in the day with hip hop, there were samplers like Akai MPCs, and people get to sample everything and they didn't clear the sample. And so you had bands like De La Soul for years, they couldn't put their stuff out because they got caught up in litigation because they didn't clear their samples. Tommy Boy didn't clear the samples for like until like last year. Early this year, they finally were able to go back and put those records out. It took forever to get the legal work done to clear it and actually make it legal that you could use those things. So AI is kind of like to me the same kind of scenario. The AI is way ahead of the law in terms of sometimes people are able to take pieces of trademarked, copyrighted, stuff that's patented, and just grab it and say, "Oh, it's machine learning." And then people are challenging that and say, "Well, that's machine learning is taking something that's exactly from my copyrighted piece of work."
And I mean, I think that it happens so much. More recently, Kanye, I think, has some new music out, and there was a sample from NSYNC, I believe, that he did not clear, either NSYNC or the Backstreet Boys. I get them confused.
Mhm.
But literally, it's great music, but he did not clear it. But he still put the music out. So now I'm just kind of waiting to see if there's going to be
Gonna
some
get
good action
hit.
on it.
Yeah, you will get hit because they,
Yeah.
there are places that will tell you like I'm a SoundCloud artist and it tells you don't upload it if you didn't clear the sample
Well,
because
Kanye, I guess
we
Kanye
can't.
says he doesn't care. He said, "I'm
Yeah,
yay. I'm gonna do it
yeah,
anyway."
yeah, yeah. Well, people do what they want, then they get cease and desist letter, or they got to pay the money. Like Ice Ice Baby, he said it wasn't. Well, that's a Queen Bowie song, but I changed the beat. It's like, no, you didn't, and then he had to pay.
Yeah, same thing with Pharrell and, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. The song that they from Marvin Gaye's family.
Oh yeah, yeah, that song. Yeah, he got hit with that. Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just difficult because being a musician, I'm more of a jazz musician, an experimental musician. I got all my synths behind me, so I play my stuff. I actually write and play on the piano and the keyboards. But today, there's a lot of kids, a lot of people learn. They don't really know how to play. They more of a producers, and so they sample. And there's a skill to sampling. I'm not going to say it's not a skill, but I'm like, why? I'm not going to play it again. I'm just going to go on my Moog and I'm going to create my own beat. I'm going to create my own riff. And I've hardly ever, never get challenges because my stuff's all original. But the kids today, well, I don't have time to do that. Well, I don't know how to do that. So they're doing the sample game, but you got to clear it. You gotta know what you're doing, what the consequences of what you're doing. Like you could make that beat, but you might have to pay for it.
Yeah, and I think it's somewhat of a lost art as well, because when it's so easy to use technology, why would I learn how to play an instrument when I can just go to my mixing board and, do the same thing?
Well, then you have to get some company to clear your samples, and some people are get signed and they got a whole division that will clear all the samples, and so the guy doesn't have to worry about it. But if you're starting off without those people behind you, and you just think that you can do that, and I've run into a lot of young people say, "Well, my favorite artist does it." Yeah, but they've got a whole back room of people that cleared those, and you didn't. So that's the difference.
Right.
You know, so it's like just because you hear that doesn't mean that you could do that unless you understand the full consequence of what you're doing. But that's like, it's like anything you get into, like a will. Like if you don't have the will, then like the state's going to take over. And people might not want what the state does is like, well, I didn't want them to do that. Well, you didn't tell them what to do.
So, and you know what? We're talking about wills, but I will also tell folks, consider a trust. Because, the first thing our minds jump to, because we've been
Mm,
conditioned, is get a will. But maybe you get a trust, or maybe you don't need either or. Maybe there are some things you can do during your lifetime that will automatically transfer your assets upon your death so that there's not this extra expense. But that's like an individual conversation
mm,
for everybody. Now, what I'll tell people is, yes, I'm a licensed attorney, but I'm also an asset protection coach. And I've been asked several times, what's the difference? The difference is being an attorney and giving legal advice, you're licensed. But as an asset protection coach, I kind of work as a quarterback on your asset protection team. And
like
I
a
get the
financial advisor, like
well,
an investment banker type of thing, or is it different?
a little bit different. I don't give financial advice. So, like, okay, if you're in business, anybody who's in business, you should have a couple of things already in place. If you're paying taxes, you have a tax preparer or a CPA. You should have an attorney, even if they're not on retainer, an attorney that you have a relationship with. You
Mhm.
are paying insurance premiums for something. So you should have an insurance broker that you can call. You should have a bank account. So you have a relationship with a banker. And what I do, because a lot of times these people are working in silos, they're
Uh,
just
you
touching
see
base with you
you see the
from
whole
time.
picture. You get
Right.
the big picture of everything so you can see if there's problems or overlap or inconsistencies or something.
Right. And I put these people together. I get them, either doing annual, semi-annual, or quarterly meetings. And then we start making shared goals to move the business further faster. And
Mhm.
what happens is you start, saving more money, because is your insurance agent, how many insurance agents are going to tell you you're paying too much in insurance premiums?
They're not gonna do that.
They're not going to do it. And
They're
I
gonna
mean,
try to sell you another policy.
I'm not saying they're dishonest, but maybe
No,
they don't
right.
have the full picture. Okay. So, what I found when I started working on a team for people, we start looking at everything you're doing in your business. And so I look at your insurance policies. Maybe you're paying $1,000 a month. I'm just going to use as a good round number, $1,000 a month in premiums. Well, if I set up a separate entity for you to do something that is complementary to your business, what that's going to do is going to give you more legal protection. We're going to work with your accountant to make sure that, once this business hits a certain dollar amount, we start, putting some money over here. We're going to reduce your tax liability. And what does that also do? It reduces your insurance premiums. So now, instead of paying maybe $1,000 a month of premiums, you're paying $500 a month. And you have this extra 500 for advertising, for your
Mhm.
reserve account, to put back into your business, to pay for employee benefits. And you also have a more efficient business because everybody on your team is working towards the same goals, and they're not duplicating services, and they're being more efficient.
Yeah, so you're basically doing like an efficiency check to make sure that people aren't wasting money or there's overlap, there's unnecessary spending. You close things or renegotiate the contract or because you've changed the structure of the business to be aligned rather than siloed. So
Right. Yeah. I refer to it as putting a moat around your assets. I'm putting a barrier between you, claims, creditors, and all those bad things that can put you out of business.
so you're moving somebody from being like a sole proprietor to having some more legal protections.
Right. Moving you from being an operator to an actual owner.
Hmm.
Because if you're starting out as a solopreneur, you may spend so much time working in your business that you cannot work on your business. So you already got people that you're paying in some form or fashion. Let them start working on your business while you make that transition.
Yeah, because like so that's moving toward like incorporation rather than somebody being like to actually maybe talk about what's the step because somebody might be starting as a business and they're like they just a sole proprietor. Then they
Oh,
might
no,
move to like an LLC. They might move to a small corporation or what's
exactly.
what are the benefits or what size do you need to be? What profit level do you have to be at to make those decisions?
So I would say anyone who's operating as a sole proprietor, that means that you have not formed any sort of entity at all with the state that you're in. I'm going to spank you on the hand because that's bad. You know, how when you're young, your mama say, that's bad. Don't do that. Okay, that's bad. Don't do that. Because what you do, you open yourself up for liability, and a lot of times it's easy, especially as a creative person, because you're just out, making the music, producing the art, and that's your sole focus. And depending on how successful you are, you may not think it's worth the investment to actually, go through the formalities of opening a company. But that's really the wrong attitude to take. Anyone who's in business needs at least one business entity. Um, because what it does, one, you have tax savings. Now, I don't give tax advice, but a lot of the work that I do yields tax benefits. So you have write offs that you can have as a business that you will not have as a sole proprietor. Now, and also as a sole proprietor, you're using your social security number for everything.
Hmm.
Well, if you do not have a stellar credit rating, or I'll say if you are credit challenged, or maybe you just don't have a credit history at all, having business credit and doing things in the name of your business makes it easier for you to get things done. Also, if the business is unsuccessful, it's easier to close the business down and open a new business and still maintain your good credit, your good personal credit. So that's
Oh,
one of the main reasons.
is that
Um,
like the tax ID number of the corporation versus your social security for your sole proprietorship?
Exactly, because as a sole proprietor, everything, you're using your social security number for everything. But if you have an LLC or a corporation, you're going to have a tax ID number,
Mhm,
and you're just keeping things separate. The term that I'd hate to hear is the word commingling. When you
mhm.
start putting business money in personal accounts, that's bad, 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 bad. Because what it allows to happen is if you're sued and somebody says, well, she doesn't have a real business, they can reach into your personal savings and your personal assets, to get money to satisfy a judgment against you.
Yeah, that's a bad scenario. So, yeah, it's a better to protect yourself if you feel like you can I think some people feel the overhead is like, "Well, I don't know if I wanna pay," for the services because a lot of people, like, they're just thinking about, "Well, I want the money so I can put it into the art." Or put it into the project. If I have to put X here, then I can't put the X there. But I think you have to have a bigger plan than that, from what you're
Well,
saying.
and some of it's mindset. So, for those people, they are looking at it as an expense. It's not an expense, it's an investment. It's an
Mhm.
investment in you and your future because you're really not in business if you're not doing business. You're not. And over time, you will recognize a savings. The cost to start an LLC in most states, less than $100. It's a form that's filed with the Secretary of State's office. I advise using an attorney, but you can actually do it yourself. You can do it yourself. Most forms are very simple. Where you get into trouble over time is that if you don't update it, because your business can be dissolved. And so that's when you run into issues. But just getting started, if you're in business, take the time to set it up properly, because what happens when you get a huge windfall? How do you handle that if you're not set up properly?
Yeah, yeah. If you actually get a sync licensing deal and you're an artist and you didn't go into that, you're a sole proprietor, and suddenly you get that big payday and he comes in, some of these deals can be 100,000, they could be a million if you get the right deal. And so suddenly, like the tax consequences of getting that hit with your social security number versus your tax ID number, and then having the right, you know, structure so you don't get hit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's so people just don't think about it until it's too late. What happens if you get sued and there's this huge judgment against you? Well, it's not against you now, it's against the company. And there are several things you can do with the company. Like if you filed a company bankruptcy, that's not affecting you personally.
Hmm.
There are just so many things. You have more options. And I tell people options are good.
Yeah, because businesses don't always succeed, and that's what they you can see a business where that failed, and the guy goes to the next business. He still was able to potentially entrepreneurs like the first thing they do doesn't always hit.
Exactly.
So that they're using the protection of the law and the structure of setting up a company versus that being a sole proprietorship, and then like you're sunk. Like if you go chapter 7 and it was you're not getting the next loan because that's on you.
Exactly. So asset protection is so important. And for those out there who are thinking, well, I really don't have any assets or, things are not big for me right now. I love the example that Michael Jordan has set. So, I've been asked in the past if I had one asset, that I could own, what would it be? It would be Michael Jordan's IP rights to the Air Jordan logo. That is a $1 billion asset. What if Michael Jordan did not have that wrapped up in a corporation or a trust? What would that look like? He's on his second marriage. He has two sets of children. I'm not sure what sort of estate planning he's done, but I would imagine that at the time he expires, if he does not have that set up properly, his heirs would definitely be in a
Just
huge
fight
fight.
it. Yeah, that's a problem because you never know if people actually did it right, but that is an issue because, like, everybody hears about the Prince estate. There's all this stuff tied up. When he was outside of Warner Brothers, he was signing contracts with like record labels and different companies and distribution networks, and some of that stuff is still tied up because they didn't resolve it because like the Warner stuff was all in one place, and that kind of got handled. But the other things, not so the same story. so
Well, and there's one artist that I love. And I would call it a great attempt at estate planning, but I'm still kind of upset with her attorneys. Whitney Houston. So, as much money as
mm,
Whitney had a will and not a trust. And the difference is a will
oh,
is a public document. It's filed at a courthouse. Anybody can go see it unless it's under seal. And, if you were someone with substantial wealth, I don't know if I'd want everybody to know exactly what I left my heirs because that makes them a
yeah,
target.
you probably don't. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably not a good idea. You
Yeah.
probably
But,
should
and
have like, if you wanna keep it private, you don't want the whole world looking at some decisions if they're actually private personal decisions.
oh, yeah. But now, okay. So the will part, I'm kind of upset with her folks about. But I would have gotten the trust. The part that I really like is the way that she structured the distribution for her daughter, Bobby Christina. If you are someone who has that much wealth, she didn't leave it all to her daughter at one time. She got X amount of dollars at this age,
Mm,
and she got lump sums.
like,
And she even,
stagger
yeah, and she made it that if she were, if her daughter passed away, which we did see that eventually happened, Whitney was very smart because her daughter's heirs would have been Bobby's children, and Whitney did not want her money going to Bobby's kids. Think about it.
it. Yeah,
Think about it.
yeah,
So, I mean, who knew that her daughter would pass away so young, but she passed away unmarried. And had Whitney not put certain things in her asset protection plan, Bobby's kids would have been living on Whitney's money right now, today.
mm, yeah, so she
Yeah,
kind of at least somebody was kinda had the foresight. Yeah, you have to kinda you do need to consider the things and some people, because, death is not something they wanna think about, and the
right.
whole idea of planning, that gets them kinda start thinking about their mortality, and they don't wanna think about it, but it's like it's an important decision to make for all kinds of reasons. You do need to focus forward if you've got all this all these assets, which are like, the intellectual property, the physical property, the homes, whatever. You do have to have some kind of idea, or the world's gonna take it, and then things are gonna not be the what your heirs or people around you deserve because you're not taking care of it. You need to
Well,
like, take care of that, like you take care of the day to day.
and a lot of people, especially if you are the second or third spouse. I've had people come to me and, they may be wife number 2 or 3, and their husband forgot to update the beneficiary designation. So wife number 1 may have gotten an old insurance policy, or there may
Mhm.
have been a piece of property in wife number two's name. And I'm wife number 3. I've had to pay for the funeral, all final expenses, and I'm grieving the loss of my husband, and I'm having to deal with, remnants of the past.
Yeah, because
So
they didn't think it through. Because like, a lot of times people don't wanna touch those insurance contracts. You did it when you signed it. You don't ever think to call them up to do so that's the thing I'm wondering, like, you do this as the whole holistic picture. So part of that holistic picture is somebody's got insurance contracts, if they got other things, like, you do a review, right? To see, like, it does this make sense for where you are now, right? You're doing that full review?
And not only that, but I tell people treat it like a wellness visit. So if you're going to get an annual physical, treat this like your financial physical for your business. And, anytime there's a life event, did you get a divorce? Did you get married? Did one of your children, reach the age of majority? Are they too old for your health insurance now? Have
Mhm.
they gotten married? Because maybe, you have adult children and you have minor children. And so your minor children may need more than your adult children because they're able to work, they may have a
You might have
family.
change that the beneficiary structure,
Yeah, exactly.
or even the beneficiaries, because like, now this person kinda aged out, they don't need it as much. Maybe they want the grandkid to get it, or maybe you
Yeah.
want somebody else to get it, so you have to make an assessment, like we said, to like, where's your life now versus where it was when you signed that document, you know?
And another thing that's really tricky, and people don't consider this, but what happens if what you left to your children, one of your children goes through a divorce? And so now, the 20 acres of land that I left you, that my mother left me, is part of your divorce settlement. You
Mhm.
know, that's not really what you want to happen. And so there are so many creative things you can do on the front end, but it just takes being intentional.
Yeah.
And it's not an expense, it's an investment.
Yeah, just the investment in, like, the family not getting into fights, or your loved one not getting, like, the rug taken out from under them because you didn't take the time to look at your first marriage, or you didn't look at your old assets or your old contracts. Like, maybe you had contracts for your royalties, and they might have beneficiaries on those contracts that, like, if it what happens if it doesn't go to you? Like, and you might have put it to your first wife and forgot to change it to your second wife or your
Exactly.
third wife, whatever. And then suddenly, like, they're getting all the money, and that's where all your money's coming from, that, and you didn't think about it.
So can I share an asset protection tip with you? One thing you may want to consider if you are a creative, and you may have royalties that will pay in perpetuity. Consider not leaving those to natural beneficiaries. Leave it to a trust and make sure the trust is set up generically based on your family, who's alive, who passes away, and you put restrictions within the trust that will prevent those assets from being part of a marital distribution settlement or a divorce.
That's a
So
bigger idea.
yeah,
That's a better plan. Than a lot of people probably don't do that, and then they run into the problem because they didn't think of it. They put it into the trust, because everybody thinks, like you said, about the will, and they don't think the trust might it seems like a better idea as people are getting into these very complex arrangements, because of the way your life is, the way you're getting paid, it might be complex. Like, you might have Bitcoin, you might have all these assets coming from overseas, money transfers and systems, and you might have money in, like, Asian markets
yeah,
outside of the US. You got a banker in Hong Kong, and you set something up there, and then you didn't figure out, like, well, it's going to a Swedish bank account. Like, so what's going on? It's like, did you look at the whole picture and have a bigger vision than just a narrow focus? Like, why did you even do that? You need to look at the bigger picture. I think a lot of people don't have the big picture view.
mhm.
They tend to be in lanes and say, well, this is for this is for that, without seeing, the issues with that.
So another thing to consider, because more people are either getting divorced or just deciding to just not be married. They're in partnerships. And so, what happens when you're in a partnership and you are a creative person, and the person that's in the partnership with you says, well, yeah, that song that Scherrie wrote, I contributed 50% to it. And Scherrie doesn't have a will. And I've been with Scherrie for, 20 years, and everybody knows that I helped her create every piece of art that she ever made. If
Hmm.
you have all this stuff in a trust to begin with, it alleviates a lot of that. And also, if you decide not to be married, but just to be in a partnership, and to just do life together, I'd recommend that everything you do it contractually. So on the front end, there's no misunderstanding. And maybe you and this life partner, maybe you have kids. That's a whole nother level of complexity now, if you do not have a will or a trust. So consider using contracts, a will and or a trust to kind of clean those things up.
Does the common law, like wife or husband, come into play? Like if you go like 10 years, and
Okay.
does that come into play? Like that it's gonna suddenly the state's gonna say, well, it's like it is like this, and you have to do that. Is that does that come into play?
If it is a common law state, every state is not common law. Some people think no matter where you are in the world, if I've been together with you 10 years, no, because I'm in
No.
Mississippi and that's not the case. Um, so
So it's
yeah,
like Massachusetts or New York or I don't know which states. I know Massachusetts is supposed to be a commonwealth, so I'm thinking that's common law, but
and you got to be super careful. Give you an example. Halle Berry. Now, awesome actress. But Halle, you need to move. I think she's in California. You have two children that you're paying somebody else child support for and separate maintenance. And the first child, they were not married. The second child, they were married. And so when you're planning, also consider, like you just mentioned, the state that you live in. Because if something happens to your business interest or your family dynamic, do you see how that affects your overall asset protection plan?
yeah, yeah. Like if you don't understand your state law and you got, you're incorporated in that state, you got married in that state, or you're been in a relationship in that state, then it's going to apply, right? So if you're in a common law state, then 10 years does apply. If you're not, then maybe it doesn't. But you kind of, some people don't think about the things that are around them. They
Yeah,
kind of don't have the situational awareness. And that's where you need people like yourself to kind of come in. Cause like, yeah, I'm an artist. So I don't think about those things. Right. So yeah, but you probably should. And if you don't, then you should have somebody that kind of guides you at least a couple times a year and gets your head around it. And maybe even if you're not paying attention, at least like you trust them to help you start to make the right decisions.
right. Because, if I were representing Halle Berry, after that first situation with her daughter, I would have said, Halle, you need to move. You can buy a big house anywhere. You need to move. So now with the second child, it's part of, I guess, the divorce settlement. Not only is she paying her ex-husband child support, but he also gets a percentage of all of her earnings as an artist. And I'm not
Wow.
sure for how long.
Wow. That
But
that's that's
that's
big.
just that's just well, no, it's kinda crazy because I would've told Hallie, "This is what you need to do, Hallie. Before you get married, put this stuff in a trust, have a prenup. Oh, you didn't get a prenup? Let's do a postnup." There are
Mhm.
so many things she could have done before things got bad and she was headed toward divorce, but I don't think anybody was, like, "Let me come, let me talk to you, Hallie."
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. I think some people maybe they think, they live in this kind of, they kind of got their eyes not on the prize and they're thinking things are one way when they're not. And so it's hard to deal with the reality because like then it hits you hard. Like if you've been kind of like denying what's around you and you don't want to deal with the truth of the actual situation, then you're in denial. And I think a lot of people end up having problems where they need like a counselor on top of before they even get to the lawyer to give them the kind of perspective like you're doing something that's kind of codependent. You're not thinking about your own self-interest. You're not protecting yourself. But you might have a tendency because you haven't solved that problem. So you might not even be ready to get to the lawyer because you can't even see that without going to the counselor.
Well, and you know what? I have a good friend who shared something with me literally this week. We're always bouncing stuff off each other. And he was like, Sheree, some people just mimic the best options they've seen. So if you've never seen some of this stuff in practice, maybe you're from Iowa and it's your dream to go to Hollywood, make it big and be an actress. You've never seen a model of an actress in Iowa who's been successful, who has these things available to them. So now you're out in Hollywood and you have these people who know the game that may take advantage of you.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
why, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, you get a manager and you think they're taking care of you and they're kind of taking care of your own interest. You got to be careful because like you can get a whole management and structure around you and everything's like 80-20. And because they're getting big money, I mean, this happened with the Beatles. When the Beatles at their heyday, they had like Brian Epstein had like the worst deal in like music history. Their royalty deal was terrible. And it got renegotiated like in 1970. But they didn't even notice how bad it was because they were so big that they were getting so much money, they didn't even realize how much more money they could have got because they
Right.
were getting like terrible rates. So it's like unbelievably low rates for what, but there was so much money coming in because of Beatlemania that they didn't even see it. And their management was kind of masking it, and they were just on this train. And you got to be careful when you're like an entertainer because people around you, they're supposed to be serving you. Sometimes they're not serving you, and you need that other set of eyes to check.
Well, I mean, look at TLC. Literally, they were the biggest girl group in the world at some point, and they were driving RAV4s. Come on now, RAV4s. I'm not knocking RAV4s. Toyota makes
Yeah,
a
like, yeah, why you should have a Lamborghini.
I mean, Toyota makes a solid truck. I'm not knocking the RAV4,
Yeah, yeah.
but you're the biggest girl group in the world, and you're
Range Rover, maybe.
something. Tony Braxton filed bankruptcy twice. Now, the first time was management. The second time, I think there was like a illness related thing, but still, there should have been some protections in there that even in illness you have. And I'm going to give you a quick backstory. My mom passed away at 36.
Mm.
And by that time, she'd been in a nursing home for 3 years. So who thinks at 33 you're going to need long-term care insurance?
Oh, you
That
wouldn't.
you need, yeah, a designation for your two minor children, a designation of guardianship. But these are things as part of your asset protection plan you have to think about. You're thinking, well, I'm too young to be thinking about nursing home care or assisted living. You are not. What if you're in a bad car accident and you're unable to care for yourself? Or a skiing accident, a swimming accident? Kobe Bryant, who knew
Yeah, that would
that?
happen. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, we have a lot of problems today because of, we have these big, we just went through the pandemic, and because of the pandemic, there's like long-term care implications of the pandemic. There's
yeah.
issues that people might have. They really should look into what you just said, the long-term care, because COVID, if you read the medical journals, it has a long-term effect and it has a potential to put you in that nursing home. A lot of people might end up there a lot earlier than they ever thought, and they don't think about it because they're like, "Oh, I'm 30, I'm 20, I'm 40, I'm not ready to think about that." But regardless of this, the accident, there are things happening in the world that maybe you should think about those type of things. But people, I think, is the mindset was like, "That's not something I got to worry about till I'm 70."
Oh,
And
no.
they like, that's not always the case.
I mean, literally, people were being, diagnosed on Thursday with COVID, and 2 weeks later, they were dead.
Yeah.
Like, and so who knew that, like, now my family, if you don't have burial insurance, now you have to scrap up money to bury this family member. And maybe there were for some families that had to bury multiple family members. And it's just, but asset protection, it's not a sexy topic, but it's necessary.
Yeah, my father was an insurance agent for 30 years, and he's not with us anymore. He had Alzheimer's, and we had that situation, and he was in the 70s, and we had to deal with it. And my mother, was able to figure out that, because my father was an insurance agent, he had gotten some policies that had features that we were able to kick in. Because he had been an agent, he was selling these things to his clients. And so my mother had to figure out that she actually had it, and I helped her see it. But yeah, there's a lot of times, people aren't that lucky that they didn't have somebody didn't have the foresight. Like my dad was selling insurance for so many years, he had the foresight to kind of set that up for himself. But it isn't sexy. Like you said, it's not something anybody's thinking about. They're thinking about the next big thing, and it's like that. Whoa, that's a downer. And I think it's like, how do you get people to not think it's a downer, but understand it's an asset?
Well, and that's difficult because some people think if I talk about life insurance, I'm going to die. You're not going to die. I mean, but it's like almost like it's taboo. It's like if I
Yeah,
if I say it out loud, it's going to happen.
yeah,
No, it's not going to happen. But you have to have the conversation. One thing about me working on different asset protection teams, I get to see stuff from all over the world, like how people do things differently. And each time I put together a new team, I learned something new. I don't have all the answers, but when you're working with other talented people, it improves your skill set. One thing that I tell people to consider if they don't already have this as part of their insurance plan is to have critical,
illness.
what is it? Critical
Cro-
care coverage.
Yeah, critical illness coverage. Yeah,
Yeah, illness.
care coverage.
So, if you are found to have a terminal illness and you have a decent sized policy, you can spend it now. Like, go buy you a Lamborghini, go do this, go do that. And
Yeah,
so, but you have to
important.
build the policy the right way.
Yeah, because I'm a cancer survivor, and I had it when I was 27. I've been clear, so I went and got a special cancer coverage because I was able to clear. Because I've been in remission for like 20 years, and so I was able to get this special cancer policy that I went in for to a broker, and I found it's like if I ever get it again, it will kick in. And I was
Yeah.
able to get it at a really good rate. And I found, but I was looking for it. I was looking for what I had, because I was in a situation where I had been a cancer person. So I have a different, if I go to a broker or an underwriter, they're like, oh, you had it. So, but, I found a loophole. I found a company that was providing this type of cancer. If you hadn't had it, then they gave me a deal. So it's not always impossible to get what you need. You might have to do a little work. You might have to get some people to look for you, but you have to kind of know the reality of what the situation is, and then try to see what the best protection could be.
Now, and speaking of protection, because anytime, I'm honored to be on a podcast, I want to really make sure that your listeners get something awesome out of the experience. So I have another asset protection tip for you. You ready for it? Okay. So I'm not sure if you are aware of the law that has recently sunsetted in New York that opened up the statute of limitations to allow people who have abuse claims to file civil lawsuits against their alleged abusers. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with that?
I think I heard something in the news, but I didn't really track it that much. But you
Okay.
can talk more about it.
Well, and I'm giving you the flip side. I'm not going to do the salacious part of it because a lot of it, there's some salacious details out there about certain celebrities. But say, for instance, you are an individual who's been accused of something and you're saying that this thing did not happen, somebody is defaming you. Part of asset protection is making sure you have adequate coverage. So, insurance does not cover you for intentional acts,
Mm,
but depending on the type of homeowner's policy you have, it will defend against defamation claims.
oh,
So, and I'm just using P. Diddy and Cassie again.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
So he's got
Cassie's
something where that he could protect that asset with the homeowners. You're saying?
possibly. So, like, say for instance, she sued him and he's saying these things are false and he wanted to fight it. Well, he can, countersue and, sue her for defamation. And there may be some coverage under his homeowner's policy, but people don't look at stuff like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't even think the homeowners would cover that.
Well,
Because it seems like it's the house, so I wouldn't really how would they cover that? But yeah, it's interesting.
yeah,
There's that's why you need to know the law.
yeah,
You know?
you have to. It's not on most policies. It's not just automatically there. It's an endorsement.
Mm,
So but that's something that you need to be aware of. And if you don't have somebody who's working with you, depending on the type of industry that you have, like right now, it's very popular to be an influencer or vlogger on
mm,
YouTube. And if
mhm.
you're reporting the news, like you have Tasha K, she's a huge YouTube vlogger.
YouTuber, yeah.
And so she's getting sued left and right, or at least they're threatening to sue. She needs some way to protect herself. And some of this could be through a lot of it may not be through insurance, but it may be the way that her assets are structured. You
Structured.
know, who are you
Trust
suing?
rather than being in a sole proprietorship if she put things that are trusted and put things that are tax ID rather a social security number, that thing we were talking about should be
Yeah.
more protected.
Mhm. And also, her possibly being an employee of a company instead of, she may be the owner, but
Mhm.
depending on the structure, there's certain liability for the company and for her individually. So there are so many legal
Oh,
yet
yeah,
creative
she
ways
could
to do
create
that.
like an entertainment company that
Exactly.
she is the blogger or she's the YouTuber, but the company is not her. It's this other entity and she's working for that company or whatever. But I mean, if you structure it in that way, because if you get the problem I guess with the YouTubers, if they're making statements about other people, then they can get sued about situations. And like if it's not just all owner created material, and it's just like they wrote themselves, but if they're actually commenting about things happening in real time, then you run the risk of liability.
Well, and not just them, but they are getting sued. Like if I'm on your show right now and I say something that's derogatory, well, you allowed me to come on your show and say something derogatory about someone. So, that person can also sue you for having me on your platform.
Mhm.
So, that's something that you may want to consider like, oh my gosh, did Scherrie sign a form? But
Yeah,
hopefully I'm not getting you in any trouble today.
yeah. We have the ability to have forms. I haven't looked into that because we haven't tried to go into areas where we tend to go. I'm not more of the kind of I don't know, like a TV show gossip type of thing. So I usually don't go in that zone, but and I try to stay away from things that may go that way. But yeah, it's probably important to maybe think about doing those forms. That we have the ability as podcasters to have forms where people could sign like legal documents. I looked into it, but like I didn't at the time when I've been doing so many podcasts, I haven't been hit with anything. Cross fingers, but it depends on what you're doing.
Right.
But yeah, it's a good thing to think about. I hadn't thought about that until like you brought it up. It's like it's not a bad idea.
Cause see, you'll mess around, invite Kanye on the show, and Kanye will say something crazy.
Oh yeah, you get the bigger the
And
guys you get, like they do. It's like if I start getting the A-listers on, even the B-listers, then you run the like a lot of times I'm like if you live in the underground, then you're kind of flying under the radar. But once you get to the A-listers and the B-listers and start having them come on, there's a tendency for them to kind of they go big. When you go big, you can get hit big.
exactly.
So yeah. If I've always kind of like, well, once you go big, you got to change your whole structure. But maybe before you go big, you got to prepare for it. What you're saying is maybe before somebody goes, well, I'm not at that level, so maybe I should actually act like I'm at that level. So if I acted, next year I get a big guest, and I wasn't structured up, then I'm suddenly going to get hit. So that's kind of good. That's very good advice.
So yeah, definitely. So I just, tell people plan for tomorrow today.
Yeah, that's your mantra. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense to a lot, and I see a lot of people will come up with excuses why they can't do it. And I even myself is like, wow, I should have those legal forms. I should have the releases. I should set myself up. And so like you can find like where you're vulnerable. You should look into it. Like a lot of people don't want to look into their vulnerabilities because they kind of like, oh, I'm kind of wide open here. Maybe I don't want to think about that, but maybe you do have to start to protect yourself.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then, no matter what you think, like I don't have the time, I don't have the money, just start by committing something to writing and then reviewing it on a regular basis. And then if you feel like you have more time or more money to invest into an official process, then start setting things up. But I'm telling you, you already have a team. You already have a team. You already have a banker, insurance agent, all these people. Put them together to work for you in your business.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you people come to you, you're the person that does that. You're the
Yeah.
person that sets that meeting up, that schedules that for your client.
Yeah, and I do an assessment because, there may be things that you're missing. Maybe you don't have standard operating procedures. And so we got to get that going. You don't have any metrics, any key performance indicators. So those are all things that we look at. And I try to use people that are already working with you. You got some folks that'll come in and try to bring their own people in all the time and replace folks. But if you have people that you have relationships with who are familiar with your business, let's get them on the same page about what you need, because
Mhm.
they're not always independently proactive. The first thing I do, um, on the law firm side, if somebody comes to me and they need business help, I'm like, well, who's your accountant? That is one of the first people that I talk to, because
Mhm.
I may set up this beautiful legal structure, but from a tax standpoint, it doesn't work because I don't understand the tax strategy that you have. And so now
Mhm.
I've just messed all your income up.
Yeah, you probably need to figure out like, yeah, they got this complicated tax arrangement. You don't understand what the reason is. Yeah, you probably, yeah, you're missing part of the picture.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's always like when somebody goes into some, I'm a producer and I'm arranging something. Somebody could come in if they don't understand what my vision is. They say, "What do you need that for? Like, why are you doing this?" It's like, well, you don't see the big picture. This is like a orchestral piece with movements. It has a lot of complexity. It's not this. But if you thought it was something, you have no idea. So you're just like, well, you can take that out. You can take that out. It's like, well, no, you can't, because that's like part of the structure, the foundation. I think people don't realize like that you have to have understand somebody's intentions, and if you don't read that, like you need the accountant's intentions, right?
exactly.
Yeah, that's important because I work in like software design. We have like arrangements like this standard like SOWs, and then we also have like, okay, we have like a tolerance for like this is a task that we've signed up with another company to do, and we have so much of a range before we actually violate what we agreed to. We agreed that we're going to provide this service every day of the week, and as a backup, we can do this and another back. If we miss our key points, then we violate that contract. So we have to understand what our work orders are and what our SOWs are. So like, oh, we've been missing these key points, and we're going to lose the contract. So we're constantly doing an assessment because it's like every day. So we're aware of that. We're not even doing that yearly. We're doing that like nightly. But
Yeah, makes a difference.
yeah. So is it more often that do you think it's just once a year, but some people need it more than once a year? That kind of
No.
review.
I mean, I would say quarterly. And we're in a virtual world. You don't have to have people sitting around a conference room. Get them on Zoom. And
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be a half a day. Maybe it's an hour quarterly for people to check in. You have an agenda prior to the meeting. You should be getting monthly reports anyway in some form or fashion. And so it's
Hmm.
like, hey, what's changed? Where were we at this time last year? What are we looking to do coming up? Especially depending on your fiscal year. You want to make sure that those meetings are set up so that at the end of your fiscal year, because everybody does not have December 31st as a fiscal year.
Mm.
Um, a lot of companies do just because it's really easy. But especially if you do not want your fiscal year and the end of the tax year to conflict. So you need strategies in place to kind of, ebb and flow throughout the year so that nothing is missed.
Yeah, you don't want to miss your core deadlines because you didn't understand. Or here, a lot of times, like famous people, like they had management and then they missed their tax reporting, and they assumed that their people were doing it, and then it's like, well, they weren't doing it.
Right.
So it's like
Or
you're like, oh, it's like you got to be careful. Like you really have to be part of your process. I think you can't just hand over the reins 100%. I think you do need to be involved to at least understand what's going on to a certain degree, right?
definitely. And one thing we look at as well, job descriptions. It could be that you have a business manager and you have not communicated to the business manager that they are responsible for getting your taxes filed, not them personally doing it, but for hiring the person to do it or getting the information to the person who's going to do your taxes. So it could be just a function of your job descriptions are not sufficient to support your business because people don't know what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, you made assumptions that, oh, this person's gonna do it, and you just didn't, like, oh, they're doing it. Like, you probably need to check that. So
Probably need to check that.
you have a health check. Yeah, like, is that health check is like, are my taxes being filed? Are my regulatory responsibilities being met? Am I actually doing the reports I'm supposed to do? Right? Am
And
I
not
actually, if I have regulatory requirements on my business, don't say, "Well, I'm not into that." Like, make sure that you actually been hitting those deadlines and actually sending in what the guidelines say you're supposed to do.
right. And not only are my taxes being filed, but are my tax liability payments being made? Because you can file the taxes, but
Mm,
if you're not making the payments on anything that you owe the government, that's not good
yeah,
either.
yeah, you're
Um,
gonna get hit.
yeah,
And we've heard of like big celebrities getting hit with like suddenly like they didn't know they didn't pay the taxes. It's like, well, they assumed their business manager was doing it or something. I don't know, but it seems like that scenario isn't unheard of. That I've heard a lot of different people run into issues like Willie Nelson and I think uh, Wesley Snipes. I kind of heard about, but you know, they had issues with the IRS, both of them.
oh yeah. Even recently, Shakira, there was a huge
Oh,
dispute about where she,
in her country, yeah, in her country, yeah.
so, I mean, those are things you need to look at. Mary J. Blige, was recently hit with a huge tax bill. And I think maybe some of that was a function of her divorce, where her husband was her manager for a period of time.
Oh,
And,
that could be.
sometimes things get missed or overlooked. But for somebody who's been in the business that long, Mary, why are your taxes not filed and or paid? So, having a good asset protection team can help you.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, and we're kind of winding down, is I think artists are so into their artist mindset, right? That they feel like, well, I don't need to even get into that. I got somebody to do that for me. But your name is still on things. And I think that's where the bottom line is like, well, you're still kind of like in charge of your life, right? So if
Exactly.
you have to check on it or it'll burn you. That's is that it might not be something you want to do, but it's like, you got to get up in the morning, there's certain things you got to do. And whether you like it or not, maybe you just need somebody like yourself to make it easier to digest and understand and have that trusted person. So I really thank you for being on the show because I think this is something a lot of people miss or don't think is important. Is like the last thing they want to do, and it's like probably one of the foundational things they need to be doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much. And again, your website will be fully clickable when we're published. And I do encourage people to click through on that and actually connect with you, and they can actually set up an appointment with you on that website.
Now that website will take you to the free webinar that I have once a month. And
Okay.
so, if you have questions, you can reach me on socials. My handle is Scherrie Speaks on all socials, and that's the best way to catch me.
Okay.
Probably on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm more active on LinkedIn.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much for being on the show again, and I hope you have a great new year and happy holidays at this point of the year. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you.